Stenzel, aka Cedius, that's what most people know me as. I'm a big fan of the books, so that's why I'm here.
My name is Ashley Miller. I'm a mass communication scholar, and I focus on representation issues. And I'm really interested in representation of religion and atheism in fiction, and so that's why I'm here.
I'm Heina Dadabhoy. I write for Skepchick and am therefore a quasi-professional atheist. I also kind of grew up on Chronicles of Narnia and have always been interested in sort of the tension between the two works.
I'm Ruth Berman. I write fantasy. And when The Golden Compass came out, my niece and nephew, who were then about 10 and 8, said to me, "You've got to read this." So I read it, and I told them, "You were right."
So we don't have a moderator. So this is sort of the blind leading the blind here, I guess. I guess I'm really interested in, just to start the panel off, like, when we say we're talking about the philosophy of the Golden Compass, like, what does that mean we're really talking about? Are we talking about the use of, like, Nietzsche in the book? Are we talking about the philosophy that the books are promoting? Are we talking about religion? When you think the philosophy of Golden Compass, what is it that you're thinking about?
I guess for me, it's a little bit of all of that. As a hobbyist in terms of my knowledge of philosophy and theology, I probably focus more on the theological questions and debates that it has within its own world in terms of, what does the authority truly mean in the realm of the books? What is it about the organizations that promote the authority, the Oblation Board and such, that how does that affect the world? How would the removal of those groups, those organizations, that thought process affect the world as a whole? So.
I did major in philosophy, and I was right at the beginning of my philosophy major when I started reading Golden Compass. And then I went back before this panel, obviously, when I found out I was going to be on it, and reread it. And it's one of those things where you think things are really profound before you find out that the ideas have been said before. And I'm not saying the books aren't good, they're just a little less, I guess, mind-blowingly innovative. I mean, they present ideas in an innovative way, but these are apparently not new ideas, which I didn't know when I was 18, but knew in my 20s. So, so I would say on the reread, I definitely focused more on the theology than the philosophy. But the first time around, it was definitely like, ooh, these are novel ideas to me.
I found Pullman's use of atheism in the books very interesting and enjoyable, since I don't know if I'm an atheist, agnostic, let's say. But curiously, I don't think doing it works very well in the story. And I think there are basically two problems with the way he's using the philosophy of atheism. One is that it gets too much, it overloads the story. And the other is that if I didn't know Pullman's beliefs, I would think he was a Christian.
Yeah, I get really confused by people who read the book Atheist because it acts under the presumption that there is a God, right? Like
Yeah.
That's the basic assumption.
Well, it seems to be sort of a switch. It was like all of a sudden the church were the bad guys, and they're thinking they're the good guys, and they're trying to reenact this epic battle where they're winning, but they're in fact the ones doing all of the evil, doing all of the bad. And so it was an interesting switch. Sort of came off a little bit heavy, like, whoa, you don't like the church.
But it seemed like more of a critique of the church to me than a critique of theism in and of itself. Like
It's a church that combines all the worst points of Calvinism and Catholicism.
Yeah, I would say that more than an atheist novel, which is why when people are like, oh, it's the atheist book, I'm like, no, there's angels are real in it. Like,
but they're consciousness. They're constructs of consciousness. I feel like it's saying a lot more about human nature and a lot more about like there's not so much a creator of all of this as our own ability to know is more powerful. Consciousness has come beyond humans.
Nonetheless, they are physically embodied. They meet angels and go places with angels. So to me, that like makes it not atheist, but I consider it more anti-theist than atheist. It's a critique of religion. It's a critique of the way that people look at religion. Because I don't know, maybe call me a literal atheist, but like if I read a book and there are angels physically embodied in it, I don't consider it very atheistic.
Well, the question really is, are they angels or are they beings that exist in that state, that because the authority was the first consciousness to emerge and defined what everyone else was, simply said, I dubbed the angel.
Well, and
but regardless of what they're called, they're supernatural beings. Well, y'all get where I'm coming from.
But they're not. They aren't
physical.
specifically beings, though. They're sort of floating consciousness that
I
come together, and
understand.
they've got different forms depending on what. No, I get what you're saying, but like they're not like just angels. Like they call themselves angels because that's what we'll recognize, and they they're seen as human because. They said they were more like an architectural structure if you saw like what they really kind of looked like.
I surrender on the angels example. What I mean is there is a creator and there's clearly a reenactment.
There's not a creator. There's the first. Theoretically there is possibly a creator.
There is Christian symbols that reenact what's in the Bible in a way, in an indirect, different sort of way. That's my point. Like, it's not our reality where, at least within what most of us here think, there are not these creatures that are in the book that exist in our world. That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry if I use too specific of terminology.
To be fair, though, there are also witches and zombies.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. So to call it an atheist book, I don't know if it reflects on our reality. Anyway, I'll shut up.
I think it kind of takes into like it. A lot of the worlds seem to be heavily influenced by different genres, and so I feel like it almost takes the Bible as another genre. Like you've got the witches, you've got the little lesbians. Yeah, you've got like all of these different ones that you can almost see the inspiration from them, or that what inspired them, and I feel like a lot of the things in there are also just inspired by the fictional works of the Bible.
One of the things I find really interesting about the book is sort of the mind-soul duality, while also embracing materialism, because the soul is embodied, right? Like there is a physical embodiment of the soul. It's not just ephemeral. But at the same time, there is still a duality between, I guess in the book it's more than a duality because it's your body, your soul, your death, and is that it? Is it just 3 parts?
Yes.
And so you've got these different parts, but then they're actually physically embodied rather than being totally ephemeral. Which is to me really interesting that it's like a combination of materialism, but also mind-body duality. Anyone else has thoughts?
I actually, yeah, I mean, that's another thing where I found it like, okay, I mean, I understand it's for the sake of good reading and good literature, but it's one of those things where I read it and I go, I don't know if this is really necessarily promoting atheism. Like, because to me, atheism and materialism kind of go hand in hand. Like, you can't, your mind is a function of your brain. Like, you can't quantify your mind you can quantify your mind. And like, mind-body duality seems a little bit odd in an atheist novel. But.
Well, did he specifically call it an atheist novel?
No.
Well, we're talking to what people think of it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
He just said it was a book about killing God.
That's how I got an ex-boyfriend to read it. I was like, well, at the end of the series, they kill God, and he was like, wow, that sounds pretty metal. He doesn't read. He does not read, like, ever. He read all 3 books in, like, a week. And he came back and he was like, so that's a lot more subtle than you implied.
One thing that I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if this is directly philosophy related, but I thought was interesting, is the character of Lyra. Like, she's not likable in some ways, in a lot of ways actually. And so the fact that she's the protagonist, I wanted to throw it out there. Like, what do y'all think it means for the book in terms of, you know?
I think she's entirely likable, but she's not entirely admirable.
She always calls herself like the one that lies and the one that cheats and the one that does all of that, but she's pretty much always doing it, like, at least once you get into the heart of the story, she's always doing it for sort of for the good. So I find that interesting that she's lying for good.
Growing up the way she did, you know, in that environment where she has authority figures, but no one's really watching her that closely, I think she was just allowed to be the wild child that, you know, people imagine someone without discipline would be. And her gift for creative and believable lies comes in handy later, and her youth was basically simply the practice to get good at it. And so she was destined to have this role, I think is where that comes in for me. And so I think destiny is something that, especially with the way all theometers and how the rest of you pronounce that in your head, was portraying things, is there is a destiny, there is a future that you really can't change that much. You have a path you're supposed to walk, and you will walk it not knowing it. So it's a kind of Taoist thing, you know, for me.
And I think she's really admirable on several traits. You know, she's curious, she's passionate, and she's shameless, right? Like, she doesn't function as someone who has been affected by the church in her world, right? She's not someone who is embarrassed by her body or her lies, or, you know, she has had almost no morality taught to her, which makes it so that it's sort of like, what would morality be if we came to it without instruction? Or at least that's what she represents to me. And she comes to some mostly admirable conclusions. You could disagree perhaps with the ethics of lying, but she almost always does it for a greater good. I think that she is a totally likable character. She makes mistakes, absolutely, but it's so rare that you get such a self-assured female lead in any kind of work, but especially in young adult fiction.
And especially one written by a man. He does a wonderful job of making Lyra come to life. If anything, it's a little more vivid than the boy Will is.
Yeah, Will's a little flat sometimes.
Yeah, he's even more than she is an embodiment of the meaning of his name, right? He is just will. He has the will to do things. That's it. That's all he is, and he's almost not three-dimensional because of it. But I guess because lies are more interesting, he's sort of more vivid.
And then it's interesting seeing the contrast between Lyra and Mrs. Coulter, because they both lie. They both are charming. They're both super confident, but they've taken completely different routes. Be interesting to see what Mrs. Coulter's childhood was like.
Maybe that's what Lyra would have been like if she'd been raised in a church versus being raised in a place of learning. And they both are sort of symbolized by, and in what way has their sexuality been their quote-unquote fall, right? For Lyra, it was, you know, the end of destiny and being the second Eve or whatever, and for Mrs. Coulter, it was her becoming so involved in the church that she lost almost any sight of what good and bad meant, or what it meant to be human, or anything like that.
Did anyone notice that at one point it's in the cave right after, right before they're fixing the, when they're fixing the knife. They go down to get a bush that burns well.
Yeah. There's a lot of little cheeky Bible things.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Which I actually didn't notice on my first read because I wasn't as familiar with the Bible. I grew up Muslim, and there are similarities, but there's some things that just the Quran's not long enough to cover, whereas the Old Testament is giant and covers everything. But yeah, that was interesting.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes.
In the director here.
Okay, so I have like a couple things. We were wondering what the horse things with wheels are called because we forget.
Mulefa.
Mulfa.
Mulefa.
And
They're
the other thing
elephants
I was
with
going
wheels.
to say was, I don't know, like kind of less of a question, more of like an agreement. I agree that it is not atheist, and that it is instead anti-theist, because like when I was reading it, I grew up Catholic, and I had a lot of friends at my church tell me that it was atheist, and I was like, no, he doesn't say he doesn't believe in God, and obviously there's like a lot of God stuff that goes on and Bible references up the wazoo and whatnot, but he just doesn't like organized religion, and that's like sort of the main point, I guess.
Yeah, and he didn't explicitly write it as an atheist book. He explicitly wrote it as a counterpoint to Narnia, because to give an alternative to Narnia, and he does that in so many ways between, the criticism of religion as opposed to the sneaky Aslan Jesus stuff, which I didn't realize as a child. As this little Muslim girl reading, it wasn't until I got through towards the end of the series when I realized, oh, he's making fun of Muslims. Great. And really, like I forget what they're called, but at one point in Narnia, they journey to some land where these silly people do their silly worship that isn't the right one. Yeah, and then I realized, oh crap. Allah hates me for reading this. But yeah, in the Golden Compass, I mean, you have the religious thing, but also the female thing. Women in the Golden Compass in that universe have agency, they have power, and when they hit puberty, they don't suddenly lose it all, unlike poor Susan in Narnia.
Well, they're deeply heretical books, right? Like they're trying to give you every heretical idea that there is out there, but they're not saying that the fundamental of there being a God is necessarily untrue.
Well, and I think a lot of the people that throw around the word atheist are usually the people that don't quite understand what atheist means.
Yeah, they're probably thinking Satan worshippers.
They're the ones that say Wiccan is evil and Harry Potter is full of like devil worship and stuff like that, because they're not going to read it. They're going to hear what it's about and then automatically try and ban it and like throw a bunch of titles on it.
When I was leaving the hotel this morning, the guy asked me like what the panel I was on was about, and like he went on this rant about how the books were like evil and like they shouldn't be in his school, and why would his 10-year-old be allowed to read a book about trying to convert him to atheism. And I was like, I'm just gonna walk away.
For myself, I agree with the rest of the panel, or at least what seems to be the rest of the panel, saying that they're less promotion of atheism and indictment of organized religion. And if they are going to promote, if these books promote anything, it's promoting the idea that free will is supreme and you should be allowed to come to your own conclusions, which is what I find endearing.
Well, and that sexuality is positive. Like that's, I think, the strongest message that I got from the books was that the idea of innocence was not something to be aimed for, right? Like as a woman, the messages of virginity and purity and all of that coming from church are sort of deeply opposed to what the philosophy he's promoting. He's saying that sexual knowledge is, in fact, part of what makes us human at a very basic level, part of what makes us special, I guess.
Let's get the comment back there.
Oh, I was just going to say that while I agree with you, I don't consider this an atheist book. When I read it as a young teenager, budding atheist, if you will, it lent credence to my beliefs that I could have a moral system that wasn't based off of an organized religion, and that I was a moral person as an atheist.
Well, I mean, how would the church come about anyways if people didn't naturally have a moral compass?
With the church thing and the sexuality thing, one thing I noticed is that the message about sexuality was generally positive, but they also show the flip side of it at the end of the first book with the creepy stuff going on between the demons, between Lord Azriel and Mrs. Coulter.
You're saying you didn't think that was hot?
No judgment here, but it was a little weird, especially given that it's a young adult novel. Like the stuff going on with demons, you're like, whoa, what's going on there?
What about when Lee Scoresby dreams that he's flying with another man's demon?
That's pretty hot, right? But at least in terms of the scene I was talking about, it shows sort of like how sexuality can become corrupted through the church, and shows that sexuality is a good thing, except when you're told not to. When it becomes forbidden, it can sort of become sort of a dangerous thing. But not because sexuality is bad, but because forbidding sexuality and inhibiting it in this sort of theological-ish way is harmful.
I just read that as like repression makes the naughty stuff even
Yes.
like hotter. Like that's like it just becomes like next level.
I know a lot of Catholics who ask me, like, so how do you atheists get your rocks off if you're not guilty? Like, exactly.
Well, looking at the responses on this panel, it's clear that this book offers a lot for people who are looking at it through very diverse lenses, which is, I guess, good literature. I myself read almost exclusively hard science fiction, so I'm not too familiar with traditional themes in fantasy, but I am with those in hard science fiction. And I did enjoy the series because there are a lot of hard science fiction memes where the author is explaining these otherwise metaphysical phenomena physically, such as the use of dark matter to explain certain phenomena. So as a hard
And
science
entanglement of
fiction writer,
particles.
I found this very accessible as a fantasy.
Yeah, I mean it's very much not like a high fantasy approach. It's I guess you would say it's like Harry Potter, and that it's pulling from the real world a lot more extensively than high fantasy does. But it's almost not fantasy, I don't think. It's like religious fan fiction plus science, right? It's like scientific fan fiction, I guess. It's which is awesome. That is a compliment for me. But it's not. I guess you've got the bears, which are a fantastic element. You definitely have fantastic elements, but it doesn't, because of the way they're presented, they read as scientific.
One of the things that really delighted me in the movie was that Ian McKellen got another chance to cry, "Fly, you fools!"
I read Tolkien young, and I read about Tolkien, and that got me looking at C.S. Lewis. So I started reading the Narnia series. And truthfully, didn't like it a lot. Then Golden Compass comes out, I start reading the Greetings, and I didn't like them either. And I think I don't like them for exactly the same reason. One of the things about Tolkien talks about how he doesn't like allegory. There's a difference between writing a story that has messages that are applicable to people and writing a story that's trying to push a specific message. And I don't like the Narnia stories because I think the religious background is pushing too much. It's too much of an allegory. It's pushing too much particular attitude towards the reader. I don't like Coleman for exactly the same reason.
Laura Miller wrote a fascinating book about the Narnia books called The Magician's Book, in which she argues that coming back to the Narnia books as an adult, having abandoned them when she realized they were pushing religion and resenting that very much, she discovered that there's a lot more to them than religion. There's a lot in the Narnia books for someone who is not interested in religion to get. And when she reread them as an adult, she found that she loved them all as much as she had as a child, but in a somewhat different way.
Yeah, I'm a huge atheist and I enjoyed the Narnia books as a child, and I don't feel like I can't read a fantasy story that has elements that are taken from biblical literature.
It's like I said, like Tolkien talks about the difference between allegory and applicability. And
I don't think the stories work only on the level of allegory.
writing a story to push a particular viewpoint, usually, from my experience, it makes it invisible.
It doesn't make it an allegory, though, necessarily. And then,
I mean, I think Narnia very much is.
no, it isn't. It does push a viewpoint, but it's not an allegory.
Well, and there's a lot of very successful books that are allegories, like pretty much all of Discworld. I mean,
I don't think that having a point of view makes a book unenjoyable if you don't have that same point of view necessarily, right? I can read Orson Scott Card's work, even though he's a virulent homophobe.
I don't like, the thing is, I mean, it's like, between the two books, they've got absolutely opposing points of view. And I don't like either one of them for the same reason.
Well, I mean, I don't think a book is necessarily.
It's just a matter of, I think that both of them are pushing too much to the story. The stories are weaker because they've got an action behind it. It's true, both of them.
I disagree.
Yeah, I like ass grinding. Bring it on.
It's a valid point of view, and if they don't float your boat, they don't float your boat.
So I just kind of wanted to ask like a different question that I kind of just thought of, which is like if Mrs. Coulter is the sort of like embodiment of like the influence of the church, then what is Azriel? He wants to like, because he's also someone that we should like aspire to be clearly, and he wants to do the same thing that she does, but it's like for a different set of reasons almost. So is it like he's kind of supposed to be reason gone too far, and she's kind of supposed to be religion gone too far? Like what?
yeah, I always sort of read it as like, you know how sometimes scientists will do things just because they can, but not necessarily because they should. It kind of always read like that to me, like he never stops and steps back and thinks, should I do this now?
Yeah, like he has no personal moral framework really.
Yeah, he doesn't really care about anything other than just doing it because he can, like pushing it as far as he can. That's his only motivation. And not only, I'm not going to make an absolute statement here, but it seems to be his primary motivation.
And he's supposed to like be a Nietzschean Superman, right? Like he's the embodiment of that Nietzsche idea. And so part of that is that he's almost lifted like fully from the works of Nietzsche and put into this book as a person. And there's some interesting debate about whether he is meant to be like an angel that chose to be in human form, and that's how he's been working on the thing so long. And it's sort of like he's meant to be, I think the idea is that science is not the opposite of religion. Philosophy is the opposite of religion. And he represents science with no philosophy, no humanism.
I guess I just saw him as the character whose sole goal was to remove the influence of the authority, which is what embodies the power of the organization that he was opposing. So he understood he was kind of, personally, I think he knew he was the villain of the piece from the outside. If he were to step back, he's the martyr that has to do what must be done.
But I don't know, he doesn't always seem 100% against the church. I mean, he's against it, but you would think that if that was his end goal, he would be doing more specifically against the church and less science.
I think he was willing to use them for his own ends. I think everything that he let the church do that was furthering his goal, I mean, they had resources that he could use as long as he played the game enough to have access to them. So I think he had his own goal. He was undermining the team he was working for the entire time when he was working with them. So if again, since I see it as an embodiment of free will, the novels as a whole, he is the free will gone too far, or the free will that is set against those that would be followers. And he wants to wake them up.
it's not necessarily just the magisterium he's working against. He's really working against the authority. So it's like, if you could use religion to kill God, if you're Lord Azriel, that's basically what you're doing. He's using whatever tools are at his disposal to get at ultimately what he wants to oppose.
Does the book really ever explain why
No.
I really wants to kill God?
I might just be imagining it, but I thought it was because he can, or to see if he could.
I felt that he just felt that having an outside influence on the free will of others to the level that the organization of religion was doing was morally wrong. And so he wanted to remove that outside influence. So I think he wanted to free everyone from the slavery that they were under.
Let's get the colors back there.
Oh, I mean, I thought that both Azriel and Coulter were meant to be like the embodiment of corruption, when people feel like what they're doing is for the best for everyone, and yet they very clearly harm other people in their path of getting things done, like Coulter, when Lyra earlier or whatever was about to be spliced from Pan, she stopped it because she's like, oh, that's horrible, but then she kept doing it to other children. So, I mean, she, on some level, knew what she was doing was wrong, so she was selfishly willing to prevent her daughter from going through that, but not all the other children. So, I mean, they both probably understood that what they were doing was wrong, because similarly, Azriel, when he thought Lyra was sent to him towards the end of book 1, was like, no, not you, I didn't ask for you. Neither of them wanted to do the horrible things they were going to do to their own child, but that would do it to other people's children, because. So, I mean,
And they're both sort of willing to do what it took to get to where they
but not
want.
really what it took. They were willing to do what it took so long as it didn't harm their own interests or their own progeny.
I got the sense that Azriel totally would have killed Lyra.
Eventually, but he didn't want to.
He didn't want to, but he totally would have. Like, I think that's the impression I got from the book, and that's why he was so upset, because he was still going to do it regardless. But I guess that there seems to be a difference between the two of them, in that Coulter's goal was just power for herself, and Azriel's goal was external. Like, he needed to do this to one child for one specific purpose. Versus her just kind of doing it experimentally to lots of children because she could, you know.
Well, I meant in terms of the overall goal.
Yeah.
And Azriel was causing the deaths of tons of people anyway, so.
As to motivation, I think he was faced with empiricism versus doctrine. I mean, there were things that he saw and knew that the authority said, no, this isn't the case, this doesn't exist. It's kind of a classic science religion.
I guess I'm kind of speaking without really, it's been a long time since I've read the books, but Azriel is an angelic name. It's a reference to an actual angel in Christian lore. But I guess it could be kind of said, it would make sense that Azriel could be like a fallen angel. A fallen angel, he has no more moral framework. He's not bound to that. He questions God. He actively rebels against him. I guess it's all just kind of, in that mythological, symbolic kind of sense, it feels like it all kind of works. But it's been a long time since I've read the books, so maybe I'm forgetting something.
I mean, it's like asking, why does Satan go bad? You know, why does ultimately, at least from what I understand of Christian theology, and it's, I think, even more in the forefront in Muslim theology, so I might be a little skewed on this, but ultimately Satan's crime is arrogance. It's thinking that he was better, and so Azriel kind of falls under that to some extent, I think.
Well, I remember you mentioned Discord at some point, so I'm guessing some of you are at least somewhat familiar. There is a character named Katz, and he and Azriel are very similar in one way. Azriel wants to kill God in a way that he wants to see how far he can go before he goes a little too far. In the same way, Teatime and the Hogfather, his ultimate goal was to kill death himself. The reason being, he was a professional assassin. He wanted to see if he could attain the highest goal
killing death himself. In that way, I think they're very similar because Azriel is an extreme authority figure in the same way that Teatime, however intimidating, he was well respected in the Assassin's Guild. So as a result, they both are trying to see how far can I use my influence to get what I want done, what I believe is right to do, before someone turns the tables and I become the victim, the one who is prosecuted. So I just thought that was an interesting parallel, because those books are very unrelated in a lot of ways, but at the same time there are characters such as Teatime and Azriel that really, almost coincidentally, seem to coincide with each other very well. So that was, when you were talking about why he would want to kill God, it's not so much an attack against authority as a test of his own power, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. I didn't think about that before. That's pretty cool.
There's,
go
ahead.
I was gonna say I can't remember the character's name from Equal Rights, but the main character from that always reminded me of Lyra.
Oh, Tiffany Aching?
No, Equal Rights is the sorcerer, the girl who's a sorcerer.
The female witch, or the female wizard. Yeah.
Right. What was her name? Can't remember. Does anyone remember her name?
I remember she's
never
from
shows up again.
Yeah, Tiffany Aching is way
She shows up in the
later
Tiffany
Star
Aching
Wars.
books.
Yeah, she kind of sort of quasi mentors Tiffany Aching. I just really love Tiffany Aching, so that's why.
There's a part in the book where the witch goes to Azriel's world and is like relaying what she saw, and she says that he must have been building this for centuries and centuries, and that's sort of the biggest clue that maybe Azriel is not just human, but like an angel who's chosen to take human form, because the idea is that his world has been building for so long that that there's no way he could have done it in one human lifetime, right? And that's sort of like this interesting thing that's just in the background there, that's in the choice of name for him and just sort of subtly hinted at throughout it. And that's an interesting thing that the book doesn't really take any time to explore, but is certainly in the book.
There's two things though. Angels are implied, at least with the two angels that are partners, that they are people who have died, so they're not some special thing. Maybe not all angels are, but
I'm not going to be able to pronounce their names.
Baruch
was a human that died. The other one was not. He was a consciousness.
Angel, right?
Yeah, he was a consciousness that fell in love with Baruch when Baruch was alive.
so it's like, which one is Azriel? We don't know. And then the other thing is, so angels can impregnate people? Like that would be my question. Like, okay.
That's based on biblical reference.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. In the Old Testament, there was.
And then what does that make Lyra?
Look at Greek.
Yes, but he is using the Bible.
Yeah.
I just want to say that you can enjoy a book even if you don't agree with the point they're trying to push. Like Pilgrim's Progress, I don't care for that point of view, but I enjoy reading the story because of the creativeness in it.
I love the screw tape letters, right?
Yeah, in some ways, everything we're talking about of does God exist, is God a good person, is irrelevant to what floods out of the novel, which is love is good for people. Now, if you disagree with that, you would not enjoy the book.
Although I mean, I like that. I like the fact that it promotes that, but at the same time, I mean, spoiler alert, it's really old now, so you can't get mad at me. It's also, I mean, the book ends on pain of separation, but it sort of says, even though there's a lot of pain associated with separation, love still is a good thing, even when it's that painful. I mean, I don't know if you cried, but I did.
There's a cliche from Tennyson's poetry that he could have quoted, but he didn't. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." And it sounds silly now because it's been quoted so much, but all the same.
Well, that was the first thought that crossed through my mind when the realization came to me that the reason dust settles on the individuals when it does is you've reached the point where your love of another person has caused you to reach that pinnacle where you would now sacrifice yourself for that other person. When the Mulatha finally can fit the seed wheel, they love that seed wheel, they care for that seed wheel, and that seed wheel is now the most important thing in their life. Lyra and Will, the demons settle, and the dust begins to settle on them when they would sacrifice for one another. And so yes, the love conquers all, and the love is the most important thing there is I think the strongest message of the end of Amber's Spyglass.
But I think there's also a side of knowledge and awareness to it as well.
Yes.
Like not only love, but being aware of the love and being aware of the power of the love and how it affects
And that's
you.
where dust being defined as a conscious, atom or whatever, that's where that aspect comes in. Because if it was just random space debris settling on you, it wouldn't matter. But because it's conscious and it's an awareness of that makes it all happen. So yeah, I thought it was awesome. I didn't see it coming either. It was a nice surprise when all that came together. I was thinking, oh.
I also think that it's supposed to, children will sacrifice themselves all the time. Abusive families, children throwing themselves between, parents who are fighting, that happens. But I think it's supposed to be an awareness of what that sacrifice actually means, an understanding of mortality, and not only understanding that mortality exists and what it is, but that you are still willing to risk your life and die for another person. I think maybe that's what it was supposed to be.
Oh yeah, it was a really high level.
Mm-hmm. And I really like this conversation because I felt like that element of dust isn't clear from the beginning, because at first I thought, oh, this is just a puberty analog. Like, when you hit puberty, dust settles on you. Clearly that's what that is. And then it complicates as it goes, which I think was just fantastic.
Yeah, and it reveals very slowly. I love the entire build-up of it in general. Like, the fact that you read the first book and you just like, oh, okay, demons. And then you see the boy without a demon and you automatically are repulsed, and then you're like, oh, wait.
You got very much the impression it was kind of the opposite of dust settling was a bad thing. That it kind of represented like how we kind of become blind in the sense as we get older. We're not open to all the possibilities that we were.
The church has indoctrinated you.
I was going to say, my God. But Lyra loses the ability to read the alethiometer, which I guess is, I could see how you could read that way. But the idea is that as a child, things come to us naturally, but they don't have meaning. And it's the things that we work hard at that have meaning to us. And so she's going to work hard to learn it again. And it will mean more to her at that point because rather than being a gift, it was achieved. And I think that rather than saying like dust is bad, that's saying that growing up is difficult but worth it.
Well, and in general, like when your demon settles, like kids are constantly, they don't know who they are yet. Around when you start to become an adult, that's when you start to like really have chosen your character, and like your true nature sort of comes out. So I think that's also like the dust is settling on you, but your daemon has stopped changing because you're sort of becoming you. You had like a million possibilities, but now you are you.
Let's get you a comment.
Wasn't there, I'm straining to remember this, but didn't she go to that town with all the shadows and stuff? And it wasn't when their dust settled on them, that's when they got eaten by those
Yes,
shadows?
yes. They weren't considered delicious enough until they had dust.
Because they wanted the awareness.
So dust is like salt.
Let's get you a comment.
I just had wanted to mention, it's been a while since I read the book too, but speaking of like your demon settling after the dust has settled on it, talking about coming into who you are, I hadn't, until just this conversation, realizing at the beginning they flat out point out that Pan specifically chooses to be the legally stoic more often.
Yeah.
So there is that implication that, yeah, even though you're trying to figure out who you are, there is some relative nature to you that is more
But he doesn't
likely
end
to
up the stoic, right?
Huh?
He doesn't end up as...
No, but like that was kind of the
A relative of the
implication.
same family of animals, so.
Yeah, and that was the implication, was that you have in my mind, that you have a nature that can be changed through what happens, but if there's one, I'm not saying
you're saying that there's like a sort of a leaning.
Yes, like a person. We all are born with personality. We aren't blank slates, kind of.
I think one thing that I struggled with in the book that's related to that is this idea that your personality is static, right? Like that, you know, your personality when you're 13 is your personality through life. And so I wonder, like, if Pullman's universe would allow for someone to have a personality change when they got older, or like, you know, you hear stories about people who get hit on the head and like have a total personality. Like, would their demon change? Like, would they wake up and it used to be an otter and now it's, you know.
Well, I think in that world, it's like I wake up, I see that I have an otter for demons. Like, oh, my character must have been this, and so I think their amnesia cases are going to be much more closer to their personality because they could look and go, oh, spot check. Oh, I'm like.
I don't know. I mean, if your demon really is a function of your personality, which is brought about by your brain, if you get, you know, a brain tumor, hit on the head or something, I'd imagine your demon would change because it is a physical. It's not a supernatural, magical thing in that universe.
Well, and in general, people change over the years. Look at all the people that have gotten tattoos when they were 18 and then regretted it later. I mean, your personality changes.
Is it your personality, though, or is it your experiences informing you and changing the way that you approach that?
Well,
yes.
It's implied that it's something innate, so like,
yeah,
I guess personality is like what the argument there would be. Right?
I don't remember where I read this, but someone said, we all think of ourselves, we all feel we have free will and we can change. But our friends look at us and say, that's so you.
I was wondering how much the demons themselves affect how people view themselves. It's one of the things is like all the servants always have dogs of some sort. It's like, how hard would it be to, you know, wake up every morning, see your dog demon, and then be like, I'm going to go do something completely different. Because you can see your demon and be, this is who I am. So how much does that inform the personality after the demon settles?
The book acknowledges that that is the reality, that it's to help people know themselves. So in the book it's presented more like it helps people and like it's a self-knowledge gift, but it can certainly be interpreted as a limitation. But at that point, the idea is that it would reflect your personality enough that it wouldn't limit you to something you didn't want to view.
It's something I would say that the culture in which you're raised influences your beliefs, and regardless of you know, us being a Western culture, Christian, Lutheran, atheist, Buddhist, we have similar traits and similar worldview, and it's only on the minutia that we have the differences. And so I would say in a culture where you wake up every morning, you see your demon, and you're taught that this is who you are, love who you are, be who you are, that you wouldn't want to rebel against that.
It's easy enough though if you're a dog, but I do wonder how Sir Charles Lapham feels about being a snake.
Well, and then there was the story of the sailor that his demon chose to be a dolphin, and he didn't really like sailing, but he had to become a sailor because his demon had settled as a dolphin.
Yeah, I wondered about that guy. It's like, that actually made me really uncomfortable because it's like, are you saying that you have some sort of intrinsic personality thing that you don't want to be, but you have to be anyway? That's kind of an upsetting thought, you know, that you are invariably pulled towards a destiny whether you want to.
Well, I think that goes back to the point I made earlier, that there is a path that you're supposed to walk, and I think that was Pullman expressly stating that in a way that was not expressly stating it and saying, you know, if you have a path chosen for you, regardless of whether you want it, you will walk it. And so that was the second time, you know, because Lyra's story, she's destined to be the second Eve. In that particular case, that person was expressly destined to be a man of the sea.
Well, and also there's,
If free will is over, should your demon still settle?
Is free will, or has free will now won?
Let's get the comment there.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the dog things because it's not so much of like the universe or God or whatever has chosen for you who you're meant to be. So it's like society has chosen for you who you're meant to be. And like, what if you were a servant and then you woke up one morning and you're like, Damon was like a giraffe?
not expressly stated, but on that particular issue, since he said that that's a rare case, I assume that was, since he was not going to talk about it in the book anywhere else, I think they were probably homosexual.
See, that's
I thought.
But then, like,
I thought they might be trans.
I thought they were trans.
Yeah, that's
Like,
what I thought
Yeah.
because I figured like if it's a rare case, I mean, it's not really all that
there's one
rare
case
of a
in the whole
thing.
book.
Well,
right?
it depends on your world. For that
Yeah.
world, it might be still
well, and
statistically.
then, like, if someone would look at you and see that your demon was the same gender as you, like, would they discriminate against you because you were like homosexual? Because
It sounds that they don't discriminate on that basis in that world.
Because it's explicitly innate. So it's like having a big nose or something. Like it's not your fault in the way that we can construe sexuality as being a fault without that manifestation.
Let's get the comment there.
So, piggybacking off of the it's your society or your culture, I think it's pretty important to note that at least Lyra's world is very hierarchical. And it reminded me of when Gandhi was basically saying, hey, you guys should all respect the case that you're born in because that's kind of the plan. And yeah, which was easy for him to say because he was like one of the higher ones anyway. But I think if they were in a society that was a little less like solidly class separated, then maybe people's demons being a dog wouldn't be so limiting. Maybe it would be like, yeah, sure, I'm loyal. I'm not obedient, I'm loyal. And so that would be like a different interpretation of what each animal means.
I'd have to wonder if the breed of dog would affect things, because you saw that the soldiers all had canine as well. I mean, the Tartars were all wolves, because they're specifically aggressive soldiers. But it seemed to be implied, and I want to say it was expressly stated somewhere else, that servants and soldiers tended to have dog.
In that world, but if, you know, a dog meant something different in a different culture, then
Like
having
in China, would the emperor have a Shih Tzu?
Well, and in general, like, it's kind of, a lot of the times that I think about it, I'm like, oh, a dog daemon. But if you think about it, dogs are really happy when you're just like, oh man, thanks. And you're like, so maybe these servants are just like really satisfied with their jobs, and it's not like a crapshoot, like, oh man, I pulled the short straw. Maybe they are genuinely happy like that, and that is awesome. And that is what they're meant to do, because they get satisfied.
We have to remember we're coming at it from our cultural outlook in reading the book, and we have to step into their world to say, do these characters appear happy about their lot in life? And since we don't see anyone complaining about their lot in life, we have to assume that in that culture that is accepted, expected, and completely normal. So.
And like if a child of a servant had a crow demon, like they would probably get an education because it seemed like their nature. Like it seems, in some ways, it makes it easier to appropriately find paths for people and have an external marker of what their paths, what would make them happy. Like, how great would it be to have a demon and be like, oh, so that's what I'm into. that makes me happy. So I should pursue that.
I think that it's saying that someone with a dog demon would be more likely to dedicate their efforts to a group effort because of the pack animal. So even all the wonderful, lovely volunteers that help out with CONvergence probably have dog demons.
Mine would be a wolf.
You know, that is a good question. That's a fun question. If you know someone, if you meet someone and they've read the Golden Coast, so what would your demon be?
So what would your demon be?
There actually was, when the movie came out, a website where you could go and answer a whole bunch of questions. And
Yeah,
they would
there was
give you,
like 7 choices.
There were actually quite a few.
It's like being your Patronus.
It's just you really, there were certain questions that seemed to be the key triggers to get things, but most people I know came back with either the lynx or the dog. A couple came back with the spider, but there were a number of things there, but there were 7 common ones, so I certainly agree with that.
I think probably some sort of big bird.
I'd probably be a penguin, awkward everywhere except in certain areas.
Mine would in reality be a raven.
In reality.
Yeah, a lot of birds there.
Well, I guess I go with a cat.
I have no idea. That's like a terrible answer.
Could the sign of vicious golden monkey?
Yeah, it's going to be a gold monkey. But a kind and generous.
On the subject of stratification, would a British author and audience find this a more familiar situation than Americans might, or at least Americans might be aware of?
Probably. I mean, I don't know if modern Britain, if I've lived there, is quite as stratified. But yeah, there's definitely more of the explicit history of this is the servant class and this is the not servant class. So yeah, you might be onto something there with that.
Well, the setting being England and Oxford, I would say that there's a decent chance that yes, with the history, that the concept of the stratification is going to be. It's a more recent history. I mean, they still, I don't know, I guess I feel like they still probably, while it's not an express thing the way it used to be, there probably still is a little bit of that feeling. You know, your economic class feels more like a cohesive group there than it does here. But again, I've never lived there, I can't really speak to that. But it's an interesting question.
I'd say here, when we talk about class, often race comes into play, and it sort of complicates the discussion in a way that it doesn't quite in Britain. But.
I think we're out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, we've got 3 minutes, so
3 minutes, okay,
one more question and then we'll
speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, I just wanted to bring up how you were talking about how demons are going to be like the personality representation, but there also seem to be some intrinsic kind of implications that might be a part of the soul. For instance, like when the children were being experimented on, their demons are being completely separated from their bodies, from their beings. If you think about it, it's kind of a way of assimilating a being to a single mind. For instance, religion, as Philip Cohen seems to be spitting into the face of religion. Because what he was doing was implying that train them young and separate them and make sure they learn the correct way. Think about the boy who was caught in the fish shack. He was trying to cling to something that he could barely remember because it's something that he had never really encountered. He'd been torn away from his demon at such a young age that he knew there was something he was missing, but he wasn't sure what it was. In a similar way, religion plays that role because what happens is that they incorporate you into a single mind with a set of rules, with a set of sacrifices that you must make in order to obtain the higher mind, the higher being. And as a result, that sacrifice can sometimes be so harmful it's detrimental to your health and well-being. So that it's just kind of interesting how you mentioned personality because I always thought of the demon as being something more related to the soul, the depth of mind, I suppose.
Yeah. I think I used the word wrong.
So.
And then there was the adults that had been severed, that were like completely dead.
They all also had dogs.
I don't know. I saw demons as like almost like your passion or your drive or what motivates you to be alive in the world.
Yeah, like your spark.
That's a good word for it.
Okay, so closing wrap-ups. Start at the end.
Parting shots.
I thought the series was just such an interesting way of putting, it was a vehicle for putting out an idea, but it also used the multiple universes theory more accessible, and a lot of other higher theories a lot more accessible to young readers, and portrayed it in a way that was really easy to understand.
I'm grateful to the panel for making me say, oh, now I have to reread them.
Yeah, it was one of those great, just piggybacking off of that, rereading it was so amazing after 6 or 7 years, and I can't wait in a decade. I'm going to read it again. It's going to be awesome again. So
I very much enjoy reading any book that makes me step back from the thought process that I've been mired in and reflect on why I make the decisions I do, what could I change about myself, how do I reflect myself in the greater world. So I'm a big fan of the series, and I highly encourage anyone who hasn't read them to read them.
Yeah, it's fantasy for really smart, well-educated people, or fantasy that will encourage you to become a well-educated person. And there's a lot to be said for a book that embraces physics and complicated philosophy and theology and says, I'm going to explore these in a way that's just part of this really great, compelling story about a girl in the world.
Well, thanks for waking up and joining us.